You said that you have evolved
Humanity has evolved
from what?
from
To what?
earlier species. From earlier species.
Really? And so, how do you think that human beings were created?
Okay. So you know the answer to my question, right?
No.
Yes, you do. You know the basics of evolution.
No.
All of your people should know the basics of evolution. Human beings came from an earlier version of humanity, and that came from an earlier version of humanity. Evolution takes thousands and thousands of generations to even go from one species to the next. Speciation takes a long time, and humanity has evolved over time, which is why if you look, I mean, and this is supported universally by the fossil record, which supports all of this evolution. You can see the mapping all the way back. You know this, though, Jesse.
And so, what was the early version that human beings evolved from, according to you? They evolved from what? Evolved from what? What was the beginning?
What was the beginning? Well, the beginning was the formation of organic life back at the earlier forms of the earlier days of the Earth.
I know, but what did human beings evolve from?
Australopithecine.
What?
Neanderthals, Australopithecine, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, all previous versions of humanity, previous versions of man, previous species that were Homo sapiens.
Have you ever seen a human being evolve from a species?
Evolution takes thousands of generations.
Have you ever seen it?
Nobody can ever see it because it takes thousands of generations.
And why haven't we seen? I know that some people think that human beings
thousands of generations. What we have is the fossil record, which shows us that it happened for sure.
But at some point, we should have seen it. Have you ever seen a human being evolve from an ape?
There's no reason we should have seen it. How could we see something that takes thousands of generations to happen? Tell me that before we go on. You just said in some ways we should have seen it.
Right.
That's bullshit.
Because if
bullshit.
you're evolving from something like that, if you're evolving like that, at some point, some human being should have seen another human being evolve from an ape or something.
You speak English, you hear my words. Do you hear my words? It takes thousands of generations. Absolutely zero people on the planet have witnessed that. Do you hear my words? Nobody should ever have seen it. Nobody should ever have seen a human come out of an ape. That's not real.
But if they had evolved from an ape, at some point there would be some record of it.
What?
At some point there would be some record of a human being evolving from an ape.
No, there would not.
Why not?
Don't you know what Jesse? Because a human doesn't evolve from an ape. Human beings evolved from the previous version of a human being over thousands of generations. Come on, man. You understand my words.
What is a human being?
Thousands of generations. If you're saying that an ape should birth a human, you're speaking from a level of supreme ignorance, Jesse.
Well, I am black and slow.
Supreme ignorance.
I am black and slow. I'm black and slow. What is a human being?
I don't care what color you are, and I care you to keep up with me. I don't care if you're slow either. I'm going to keep you up with me.
What is a human being?
What is a human being?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Why do you ask?
I want to know.
I would say a human being is somebody, I don't know, who's classified as a human being.
But what is
all human beings are human beings. I don't know what the definition of human being is. Make your point.
So you don't know what a human being is?
I know what a human being is. I just don't know what the definition is.
And so how do you know what it is if you can't define it?
I can define it well enough to know what a human being is.
But
I don't know what the exact definition is.
So what is it in your definition? What is it?
A human being is a primate who is advanced enough to have voice and cognitive abilities like a human.
Really? And what is a primate?
A primate is a mammal that has an advanced brain and opposable thumbs.
And who created the primate?
Not a who, a what.
What
primates were created over the period of thousands of generations via the mechanism of evolution, which is proven fact.
And so, and who gave the primate the ability to breathe?
Nobody gave the primate ability to breathe. Primates earned the ability to breathe long before they became primates, when they were earlier amphibians, when their ancestors and their ancestors were earlier amphibians. They developed the ability to breathe in order to live.
How did they develop how did they develop the ability to breathe?
So, look, what you're asking me is something that you're just going to keep me asking, how did that happen? How did that happen? How did that happen? Okay? And the answer to your question is not God did it. Okay? If the answer to your question is I don't know, that doesn't mean your God did it. That's called the God of the gaps. Now, that's an old thing. The cavemen used to do that. The rain would come from the heavens, and they would say, and they would have a god that they carved, and then it would rain, and they would blame their god for the rain. Okay? The answer to all of your questions, you're expecting me to get to a point where I can say I don't know. But I don't know isn't the gotcha. I don't know lots of things. I don't know way more things than I do know. But the answer to those questions is not, aha, you don't know, therefore my God did it. Remember, your God is one of several thousand being celebrated all over the world today, several million if you count Hinduism. And all of those people are absolutely sure that their gods are right and your God is wrong.
And so
the idea, go ahead.
And so who gave the primate the ability to breathe?
Nobody gave the primate the ability to breathe.
And how did they develop the ability to breathe if no one gave them the ability to breathe? How did they develop that?
Over the time, way earlier than that, earlier species developed the ability to process oxygen.
How?
And that evolved. How?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And so are you saying that when they first appeared, they were not able to breathe?
No.
They did not have the ability to breathe. They had no breath in the beginning.
Are you listening to my words?
I am.
So no, there never existed a monkey that didn't breathe.
And how did that monkey develop the ability to breathe?
All monkeys have always breathed.
How?
Okay?
How did they develop that?
Because they developed that from their earlier transitions.
And how did they develop
the earliest life, okay? You got to go back to cellular life, okay? You've got cellular life that's just like mold, okay? Now that mold has to process food, and it has to process air, okay? It processes the air by having by evolving, that first life had the ability to process air, to process light. That's what made it alive. And then that evolved over time. And if it didn't have that life, it wouldn't have evolved. So you're talking about processing blood, processing air, and processing food, okay? All that evolved at the very, very earliest life forms, the microscopic life forms. And then it just evolved from there.
And so
Nothing
all these things
has ever existed.
All these things evolved on their own. They just did it themselves.
Over time, yes.
And
do you know what natural selection is?
What is it?
Natural selection is the Darwinian idea that the most adaptable survives. It's not the strongest survives, it's the most adaptable. So let's say I have 10 children, and one of those kids has this immunity to, one of those kids has an immunity to a disease, okay? And then everybody just breeds, and everybody just breeds, and everybody just breeds, and suddenly all my descendants, there's a chunk of my descendants that have this immunity to this disease that might not even hit, but is there because they've been breeding all this time. But then that very disease hits. And now all the people on Earth have immunity to this disease. That's how evolution works.
That's amazing. So let me ask.
It is true.
Let me ask, how did the primate become so emotional? They get angry, they get false happiness, they get lonely, they get depressed, they commit suicide, they hurt one another.
Yeah.
If they did all this breathing on their own, what made them so emotional? How did they become emotional?
I think it's about fear of death.
So the primate had fear of death.
I believe so.
And how did the primate develop fear of death?
When we're talking about primates, I mean, I'm no expert in non-human behavior, okay? I don't want to speak to why monkeys are emotional.
But you said a primate is a human being, right?
Yes, I can speak specifically to the type of primate that is human.
So a primate is a human being, am I right?
All humans are primates. Not all primates are humans.
Oh, so some primates are not human beings?
Some primates are chimps. Some primates are great apes.
So why is the
orangutans.
Why is it that the chimp and the ape and the primate things are not emotional, but human beings are?
I believe the answer to that question is fear of death and shame. I'm going to say as well, shame. I think that humanity has this need to be in a group. Humans need to be in a group. And I think anything that endangers their position in that group or their ability to be in that group is going to require a response. And I think that, I mean, I'm no evolutionary psychologist, but I would say that the fear of being of losing status in that group, and I'm talking about tribal times now, losing status in that group, being expelled from that group, has evolved into us an emotionality, perhaps.
But that doesn't make sense, though, because if the primate invented themselves from apes and whatever, the primate wouldn't know death or life. They wouldn't know fear. They wouldn't know that because they developed themselves. They created themselves. And so it would be impossible for them to even know about fear or death or any of those things because they created themselves.
Primates don't know fear or death? Primates know fear. I mean, chimps and orangutans know fear and death.
No, they don't.
Of course they do.
No, they don't.
I mean, okay, but they do.
No, they.
I mean, of course they do.
Animals do not know life, and they do not know death. They just know they exist without even thinking. No, they just know they exist without knowing that they exist. And yes, they've been put into them to protect themselves from the enemies, other animals and things, but they don't know the difference between life and death.
Well,
so how did human beings come to know? How did they become to be afraid when they don't know that that exists?
Because they do know that it exists.
How do they know that?
Because they live and they're intelligent and they see death in front of them and they see pain in front of them. That's the answer to your question.
And where did they get the intelligence from?
We have to stop asking this question. Okay.
I want to know.
If you keep asking, where did this come from? Where did this come from? Where did this come from? Everything evolved over time from previous generations. Everything evolved over time over thousands and thousands, millions of generations, not millions of years, millions of generations.
But I understand you're talking about the earth, you're talking about plants, you're talking about stars and things, but we're talking about human beings. And you yet haven't told me, you haven't told me how they develop breath, the ability to breathe. You haven't told me how they develop the fear, the idea of fear, of death, and anger, and emotions.
Have you not heard my words?
But how does a primate know to be happy and to be mad?
Okay, are you talking about a human being or are you talking about a chimp?
A primate.
Any primate? I don't want to
Yes.
speak to how non-human primates think. I'm not an expert on that. I have no idea. I just know what I've seen a few TV shows. I know nothing more than anybody else on primate behavior.
What
I
is
know a lot about human behavior.
so you're not 100% sure then that human beings came from apes,
Human beings did not come from apes.
from primates.
Human beings did not come from primates. Human beings and all other primates came from earlier generations, earlier cousins of primates. We didn't descend from apes. Humans and apes both descended from common ancestors.
Amazing.